All right, so what we're going to do is compare using pivot tables between Google Sheets, which is on the left, and the desktop version of Microsoft Excel, which is on the right. All right, so let's just dig in. We're going to create one on the left and then one on the right, and then kind of build on its complexity and talk about what's happening. And on Google Sheets, we'll use the data menu, left click on pivot table, and it's asking you where the data is. So we'll left click on select data range. And you'll notice it's already suggesting the right range. It must have sensed where there was a table of data, so we'll use that. We'll left click on that range. We'll click on OK. And then it wants to know if it should create a new sheet or an existing sheet. Since we want to see what we're doing for this tutorial, we're going to put it on the existing sheet. And we'll left click and click on A17 to tell it to put it there. Those two pieces of information are all you need to start your first pivot table. We'll click on create, and there it is. So there's an empty pivot table in Google Sheets, and we'll come over and we'll create an empty pivot table in Excel now and just compare that process. So the first thing you do in Excel is you go to the insert ribbon instead of data. It's in a different place just to be confusing. Left click on pivot table. It wants to know where the range is, so it's not trying to guess for us. It's not that hard to select it, but it's, I guess, one tiny little additional step. So I've selected the range of the source table. I'll press enter, and then it's going to save me some clicks on this next step. It's guessing that I want to put it where my active cell is in A17. We'll left click on OK, and Excel has inserted a blank pivot table. Now on either one of these, what we're going to start out doing is just looking, hey, what category has the highest sales as far as total dollar amount? Okay, so you'll notice I clicked in the table that made the pivot table editor go away. Just click back in the pivot table and it comes back. Sheets is trying to guess what we want to do. So I didn't look at these before I said this, but what I did say is we want to do the total of each category, and that is not one of these three guesses. So we will ignore those for now. In my use of pivot tables and sheets, those guesses usually aren't right just because there's 100 different combinations. But hey, it's trying to help you, right? So we'll left click on rows, and what we want to do is add category. All right, and we'll come over to Excel. We'll do the same thing. We will left click on category, hold the mouse button, and drag it down to rows. For now, we don't need to add any columns. The values are just going to become the one column. We'll left click on values, and we will say total. And Google Sheets defaults to the sum function. If I left click on this, this shows all of the available functions that I could have used. So there's 13 functions here. And we're choosing to show it by $sign. You can also do it as the percentage of the row, the column, or the percentage of the total. We'll just left click on percentage of grand total real quick to see what that is. So it's showing you the relationship between the three total dollars. So the office supplies is 5.8% of 100%. Go back to default for now. We're going to come back over to Excel, and we'll add the total. We'll just left click, drag it down the values, real similar to what we did on Sheets. And it came up with the same numbers, which is good. And this also defaulted to sum. So if we use this drop down and click on value field settings, we can change these in between these options as well. So we have 11 options here. You can also choose how to show the values. No calculation means just show them as a sum, like we said, or you can show it as a percentage. There's a few additional options here on how to show the percentage, which is a theme that you'll see throughout this. Okay, Google Sheets may be a little bit easier to use and cleaner. Excel is going to have more options so you can customize it further. The number format did not come through as expected. Google Sheets guessed that it should be currency. Excel did not. Let's see if we can click the number format here, and we'll just say that it's currency. Click on OK. And there we go. One more thing that you'll notice that Google Sheets did that Excel did not is if you want your table styled a little bit, Excel left the table plain. Maybe that's fine. That's a preference thing, but let's make them look similar. So we'll keep the pivot table selected. And Excel uses two ribbons for pivot tables when they're activated. The Analyze ribbon and Design. We'll left click on Design, and it gives us a lot of different style choices here. We'll choose one that looks similar to what Sheets is doing. Let's say it's this one. All right, we're moving right along. So we have two very basic pivot tables. The process between the two of them was pretty similar. And so now we'll move on to what I would say are some more consequential differences between the two. So let's say that you want to add another level to the analysis, right? So we're looking at the category. Let's come in here and add another row. So in Sheets, we'll go to rows and we'll say add, and we'll just add in the ship mode. So that makes a two-level pivot table, right? There's two different criteria that we're looking at, but it's still summing it by the category. We'll come over, we want to do the same thing in Excel, and it's a similar process. We'll take ship mode and we'll drag it down into the rows. So you'll notice one thing here right away is that Excel decided to put the totals on the top of every category. That may not seem like a big deal, but if this was a longer pivot table, I typically look for totals at the bottom. So I don't find this default method to be very intuitive, but just like Excel, you have options to change it, but they're not necessarily easy to find. So if you come up and you look at the design ribbon, you can drop down the option called report layout, and it defaults to compact form. If you want it to be similar to how Sheets is on the left, and we're just going to do that so it's easier to compare going forward, change it to outline form. But before I change it, also notice where the second item that I put in the rows, which is the ship mode, in Excel, it's not in its own column, but in Google Sheets it is. So watch when we change it to outline form, it goes into its own column. But the totals are still at the top, so if we change it to tabular form, then the totals go in at the bottom, and now we're looking at two very similar pivot tables. Sheets simplifies it, just gives you this view. Excel gives you lots of different options to choose from. Now the filtering process is different between the two. And what we're going to act like we want to do is we want to come in here and just look at all the categories except for office supplies. So in Sheets, you would add a filter and you would add category. Left click on this option and just uncheck office supplies. Click OK, you'll notice that it disappeared from the table. So if you come over to Excel and you want to do something similar, my instinct first would be to do it in the same way that we did it with Sheets. So if you wanted to filter by category, just take category and also just pull it into the filters. So we'll try to do that. And what happens is you get an error saying that it's going to overwrite this table above. So let's cancel that. We're going to take our pivot table, we're going to move it down several rows to make some room, and let's try this again. Take category and put it in the filters, and it does put a filter on your table and you can filter by categories, but it's not showing them in the values anymore. It's taking them out of the rows so they can only be in one place. So this filter acts differently, and in this case, it's not acting the way that I want. So I'm going to undo that. But the way that you could apply a filter to here and a value that's shown in one of the rows is to find that value. So in this case, it's category. Click on the arrow here, just like you would in a regular table in Excel, and uncheck office supplies. Click OK. Office supplies goes away. Our values are still consistent between the two tables, so we're moving right along. We're doing things differently in Excel now, but we are getting to the same place. Okay, to show this next feature, I went back into the source data and I added some more lines and added some different types of shipping, but I decided I want one more, and then I was reminded of something that Excel does differently than Sheets, and it can be kind of a big deal. It can trip you up. So let's say we're going to change here standard classes, second day air. And you'll notice when I changed that to second day air, it did not update the pivot table. So this Excel pivot table was accurate when it was created, but I've changed the source data and the pivot table has not updated. That's normal behavior for Excel. If I come over to Sheets and I'll update this to second day air, the pivot table updated automatically. It's a big difference. Either way could be right, depending on what you're doing. To me, having the pivot table update automatically is what you want. But in Excel, you have to go up to Pivot Table, Analyze ribbon, and left click on Refresh. All right, so now that we do have these additional ship modes in each one, let's say that we want to group the slower ship modes together and the faster ship modes. So to do that in Excel, what we would do, let's hold down the control key, and with our mouse, we want to look at next day air and second day air together. So we'll right click and we'll create a group. All right, and then we want to do that for parcel post, second class, and standard class as well. We'll right click on those and create a group. So this could be really handy, right? Or let's go over and do this in Sheets. So second day air and next day air, you can create a pivot group. And the same thing with parcel post, second class, and standard class. These are working in a similar way. Excel named them differently. It says group 1, group 2. Sheets just name them by combining the names of the fields. But they both have this powerful functionality, and it works in a similar way. So let's undo those groups for now. And we'll talk about something that Excel and Sheets both do, but they approach it in a different way, which is when you're using date fields. So date fields open up an entire different type of analysis, right? They're just a number, but both of these spreadsheets are aware of the fact that it's a number acting as a date, and they'll give you extra capabilities based on that. So let's pull the ship date into the pivot table. Let's say in Sheets we want to add it as a row. Let's add it as the first row. Scroll down a little bit. And things are looking a little bit too jumbled for me right now, so we'll take ship mode and we'll make it a column and not a row. So that looks pretty nice, right? We're looking at each day and what's shipped. So let's go ahead and do that in Excel. I'll take the ship date and I'll move it to the rows. And right away, something different happens. So Excel recognized that that was a date, and it gives you some extra capabilities here. It automatically broke it out by year, then by quarter, then by month. This could be super handy, right? It could just create something for you to undo, but a lot of times you want to analyze things by quarter. So let's act like we just want to see both of these by year. So in Excel, it already did that for us. You'd have to undo the quarters, just drag it up. And we'll take this ship date out of there as well, because that's what's doing the months. And there you go, nice and clean, by year, by ship mode. Now we'll come over do that in Sheets, and that's going to work differently. So what you need to do is right click on one of the dates, and then we want to create a pivot date group. So Sheets didn't do this automatically like Excel did. So for Excel, you kind of had to undo some of it. For Sheets, you have to create it. So you have a lot of different options here. I don't think we want to do it by second today. Let's skip that one. But we will come down and we'll do it by year. So left click on that. And I just noticed to make these equivalent, we have to come back to Excel and move the ship mode over to the columns. We'll do that. There we go. They have the same analysis in both. We'll scoot it down a little bit. We have the same analysis in Sheets and Excel. We got there a little bit differently, but they both have this powerful capability to analyze things by dates, and they allow you to break the dates down in different ways. Or both Excel and Sheets have the ability to insert slicers into your pivot tables. So let's move this down a little bit. Again, give it some room. We'll take Sheets and we'll move it down. And what a slicer does is it puts a filter control on the face of the worksheet here, not in the pivot table controls. So when someone's looking at the pivot table, it makes it obvious that you can apply these filters on the fly. So let's go to data and use a slicer, and it puts it right front and center here. Let's move it out of the way a little bit. And if you want to be able, let's say, to select the dates quickly without modifying the pivot table settings, we will choose a column. We'll say ship date. And this control can let you check and uncheck different values. So if you click that, it updates the pivot table with the slicer. Very similar functionality in Excel. We'll go to the Analyze ribbon, insert a slicer, and we'll do it on ship date. It puts this control in front of you. This one's probably a little bit nicer. We'll expand it to see what's happening here. So you can show it by month, and January, March, and May are down at the bottom and they're grayed out because they don't exist in the data. If we just want to show December, left click on December, and it modifies the pivot table. You can clear out the filter by left clicking on Clear Filter. And if you hold down the Control key, you can select multiple months at once. All right, so those are slicers. You can see that they work differently between the two. And just like Excel, if I come over and I right click, lots of different options. All right, so those are slicers. Let's get rid of this slicer for now. All right, now we're going to come to what I think is a very important difference if you're trying to take data back out of the pivot table. So let's just say we wanted to point something out. We're going to use big font, and we're going to say this was the next day error shipments for 2020. I know they're in the pivot table, but there's a lot of data in there, and for some reason you want to point this out. What you could do is you just hit the equal sign and then pull this out of the table. So it's going to be 3,248.16, right? And that's nice and easy in Google Sheets. If I double click in this cell, all I did was use a cell reference to C37. So that seems fine until you try to change the pivot table. We'll move this guy down here just in case we need more room. Let's just say we added another column for some reason. We also wanted to look at the category. We wanted that first. So your new pivot table's working, everything's great, except for the fact that next day error 2020 is no longer working. So if you change your pivot table in Google Sheets, that simple cell reference breaks, and that's no longer showing the right value. But if I come over and I do this in Excel, I've already done it here, let me delete it. I'm going to hit the equal sign, and again, let's pick up, see it how it was. We'll copy this nice text, right align it. In Excel, we want to do the same thing. We want to pick up the next day error shipments for 2020. So we will left click on there, and you're seeing a major difference here in that Excel is defaulting to using the GETPIVOTDATA function. And on the surface, this just looks like it's making it more complicated, right? I mean, for years, this would frustrate me because if you showed this formula to someone else, a lot of times they wouldn't even know what it was doing, right? You hit enter and it returns the right value, but it's messy. So you could say that Google Sheets is better here, right? You can see what it's doing. It's going to C37. So if you don't change your pivot table, that is better. But if you come into Excel, so we'll take category and we'll add it as another row. But Excel's giving me an error here and it's saying, like, I don't have enough room to do that. So for this, let's maximize this window. We'll move this pivot table over to the right, give it some room to breathe. Now this formula is still working. And here we'll notice, so the piece of data that this formula is picking up is an I37. When I add category into the pivot table, it moves it down to J43, but this formula is still picking it up. So when you refer to a piece of data in Excel, just using the equal sign and pointing to it, it uses GETPIVOTDATA, which is a more dynamic formula. It's not as clean looking, but if you're changing your data, it works better. So let's take this GETPIVOTDATA formula and let's just say, well, I'm really familiar with the GETPIVOTDATA function, so I can just type that into Sheets. Well, if you put this in, it doesn't work, it gives an error, but that's okay, right? It's an Excel function and wouldn't expect it to work the exact same, but we'll hit F2 and look into it. And it's a clunky formula. And whenever I use GETPIVOTDATA, it takes a long time to figure out how to do it. So when I was recording this, I was trying to get this one to work. I couldn't do it, and I quit because that's kind of the point, right? I could get it to work if I looked up enough documentation and played around with it on the web, or if I simplified the pivot table. But the point is, Excel will write that for you, and Google Sheets just does a cell reference. And if you have to do GETPIVOTDATA, you're going to need a little bit of time to figure out how to construct it. All right, so that's pulling data back out of the pivot table. Let's kind of reset things. All right, so now we'll show what I would say is probably the last major functionality in pivot tables that you can do, and we'll compare them. So let's start out in Google Sheets, and we'll say we're going to add a calculated field. All right, so we'll just take the quantity. So we're picking from the names of the fields, so I'm looking up at the headers here, and I'm typing in the word quantity because that's one of the fields. And let's just say times 2. Why? I don't know. Why not? Hit enter, and there we go. So that's how to add a calculated field in Sheets. We'll do the same thing in Excel. And we'll go up to the Analyze ribbon, left click on Fields, Items, and Sets, choose Calculated Field. And we'll do a similar thing. What I like about how this is in Excel is you can pick the fields from here, so you don't have to worry about spelling. Not all that hard to spell quantity, but you know, hey, every little bit helps. Quantity times 2. Click OK. And there you go. All right, so I think that encapsulates all of the basic functionality in pivot tables. Now, there's a whole world of additional things that you can do, connecting the different data types and analyzing them in more advanced ways. I'm going to link right now to a video that shows how you can convert a pivot table to the data model in Excel. And then you can do something even as simple as just adding a custom field in the middle of it. Type whatever you want, move the fields around, but it will still be an active table of data. If you want to see other videos like this where we just kind of take our time and look at different things you can do in spreadsheets, please subscribe to my channel and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.